2022 was a whirlwind for trans people, flooded with anti-trans legislation and targeted hate crimes. Lives lost to this culture war that the right created to justify stripping away rights from trans people. Republicans like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott are leading this country's anti-trans push. This will ultimately lead to a trans genocide. And yes, I said trans genocide because they're attacking our very livelihoods. They want to make life as a trans person even more unbearable. They're detransitioning minors, required dead naming in schools, and even as far as taking away children from affirming parents. Some states like Florida removed HRT from healthcare coverage that many of us rely on. There's thousands of trans women with bottom surgery that need their estrogen to stay alive. This is nothing less than an intentional trans genocide.
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing them.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist.
I'm denying that trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get pregnant.
So you're denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom?
Going back to the summer, I want to laser in on a viral moment on Twitter. Jordan Peterson, the face of the manosphere, was banned on Twitter for his transphobic tweets against Elliot Page. Elliot simply had a shirtless photo shoot and interview with Time magazine. Jordan Peterson even went as far to call Elliot's top surgeon a criminal, all while dead naming him, which ultimately led Elliot's Page's dead name to trend. Jordan Peterson's banning got covered on the Hills Rising show that went completely transphobic when 2 right-leaning co-hosts defended Jordan Peterson, with the false narrative of Jordan Peterson being banned for dead naming when in reality it was for the violent transphobia. There was so much said, but let's laser in on a few clips.
I guess we should not say it because maybe that would violate some policy.
It's a dead name.
But that's crazy.
Why is it?
I don't understand.
Why is that any crazier than people change their name? Call me this. Call me this. I prefer to be called.
Right, but to not even be allowed to acknowledge that you used to have a different name.
You can
it
acknowledge.
Seems crazy to me to say that we're not allowed to do that.
But do you see how we sat here and we had this whole discussion? We acknowledged that they used to have a different name. We acknowledged that they had this life before that, but we never called them the name.
Well, no, it's tiptoeing around it because of the rule.
It's that simple. You're not allowed. We had the whole conversation. Yes. What is the problem with that? You're not allowed to call somebody by a name that they don't go by anymore. Big deal.
We shouldn't be not allowed. We shouldn't be not allowed to say what a person was for decades.
This was disappointing but not shocking to see Kim and Robbie list off almost all the transphobic talking points. They argue for the right to dead name trans people, packaging it as a right to free speech. They believe big tech shouldn't have the power to ban people for hate speech, which is arguing for social media to not have terms of service. Kim Iverson even went as far to use Prince changing his name to a symbol to falsely equate trans people's names. Kim earlier in the segment ignorantly stated the need to separate trans women from women. She brought up the trans athlete discourse, which is blatantly transphobic. Trans people's only ally in the situation was defense attorney Olemi Olurin. She held it down for trans people with the pushback she gave her co-hosts. That's the type of energy trans people need when it comes to pushing back on transphobic misinformation. A few weeks later, Olemi Olurin went on The Vanguard to discuss her viral segment, further dismantling her co-host's shock to their backlash they got for their comments.
I expect all the topics are pretty, the segments are very right-wing. I think right-wing talking points, right-wing perspective. I expect to be in the minority as opposed to Robbie and Kim or whoever else I'm on there with. But it was just so transphobic. It shocked even me. It was like, it was the last segment for the day. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm getting ready to wrap up. I think, I see the topic that we're going to talk about, Macy Gray and Bette Midler. And I think I'm going to give my little 1-2 address how transphobic their comments are. And in the middle of that, they cut me off to basically get all their transphobic highlights off. It was like every talking point for transphobia got brought up. Like it went from Macy Gray and Bette Midler to trans athletes to pronouns to dead naming. I was like, they started off the segment by being like, both Kim and Robbie were like, I support trans rights. You don't. You know how I know you don't? You don't even want to call them by their name. The base minimum respect of calling them by their name, you can't have that. You know, Kim even followed up on Twitter by calling it, oh, why should they get special treatment? I mean, no one was banned because they dead named anybody. That's not what happened. This person went on there and spewed like violent transphobia, and that's why they got banned. And that's an entirely different conversation. But instead, they raised this straw man mischaracterization, this whole argument that, oh, people are being silenced from dead naming and blah, 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 blah. And all these different nonsense free speech arguments that they clearly don't believe in just based on their own response to the negativity they've gotten for that segment.
Soon after the Hill segment, Kyle Kalinske from the Secular Talk had an interview with Jordan Peterson discussing his Twitter ban.
I just have to say, Jordan, I think it's a little bit of a moral panic. I just don't see some sort of, frenzy of people wanting to become trans.
First of all, that's a hell of a way to put it.
Why
don't you take a look at the increase in surgical interventions and see what you think? I mean, how many do you think is too many?
But you said something to the effect of, remember when pride was a sin and the criminal physicians...
And Ellen Page just had her breasts cut off by a criminal physician.
Exactly. So my question is the physician really criminal? If you agree that adults can decide to transition, then why would the physician be criminal? Don't adults have that right if they want to transition?
Not everything legal isn't criminal. And do they have that right? See, I would have left Ellen Page alone if she hadn't been parading her new abs in a fashion magazine. How many kids do you think she can convince to convert?
And that now, when you sort of let the boot off the neck a little bit...
What used to be suppressed?
The entire LGBTQ community. I mean, it was very recently we even got gay marriage in the United States.
First of all, they're not a community.
Let me ask you guys, would you ban transition surgery for adults?
I don't know.
Really?
The face of the manosphere went completely mask off, doubling down on his anti-trans rhetoric. Kyle was right for calling him out for Jordan Peterson's moral panic, believing celebrities don't have the right to transition due to the false assumption that it would convert minors to being trans. The whole trans people are groomers talking points that you expect to hear from libs of TikTok. His long pause was a self-report showing us that his ideal world, he'd ban trans surgeries for adults. His own fans criticized him for his inability to mask and effectively communicate their hateful ideology. Going back to the viral Hill segment, this clip will foreshadow the next topic that only me perfectly lays out, and the response she got was shocking to say the least.
We saw so much violence in the trans community. Specifically, trans Black women are killed at like 4 times the rate of
But not because they're trans.
Actually, that's not true. Actually,
not because they're not being killed because of anti-trans bigotry. They're being killed because they're in sex work and
why? What do you think?
Drug trade.
Again, we're not again.
But it's not no trans women. I mean, that's still bad. That's still terrible.
Trans women are exposed to no. There are lots of trans women that have very much so been killed based on men's anger at realizing what is their own sexual attraction to these women and determining that they're trans.
It was crazy to see how quickly he denied the violence against Black trans women by reducing us to criminals. Black trans people make up 80% of the murder rate. Our life expectancy as Black trans women is 33 in America, giving me a countdown to 9. Many of us are ostracized from our families, causing a rise in homelessness in the Black queer community. Job discrimination, especially if you can't afford illegally changing your name and gender. Black trans women have to balance anti-Blackness and queerphobia from cis-hetero Black people and society as a whole. Society that gives 2 dams about Black trans women dying every year. The more intersections you sit at, the more you're going to have to fight for your survival. The first hate crime against Black trans women I remember was Cece McDonald. On June 5th, 2011, Cece McDonald and her friends had anti-queer and racist slurs thrown their way as they were walking past a bar, which resulted in Cece being hit with a bar glass that cut open her face. One of Cece McDonald's attackers died from a stab wound that came from fabric scissors. A year after the Minneapolis attack, she was on trial for charges of second-degree manslaughter. The judge rejected key evidence that shows that this was self-defense from a hate crime. The swastika tattoo on Cece McDonald's attacker's chest, and 3 prior convictions of assault. Cece McDonald was facing up to 80 years, so she took a plea deal that sentenced her to 41 months behind bars. She was held in a men's prison for those 41 months. When she was released, she became an advocate for Black trans issues in the prison industrial complex. Laverne Cox and Janet Mock were some of the only well-known LGBT people with a platform that spoke up on Cece McDonald's case. They reached out and made sure her story saw some real attention. Laverne was in the parking lot of the prison the day of her release. Janet Mock used some of her media appearances to shine light on the injustice in her case and on the many murders of Black trans women. Cece McDonald is only one of many cases of hate crimes against Black trans women. The sad reality is, most girls end up murdered when they have an encounter with hate crimes. I feel most people know Laverne Cox for Orange is the New Black, but most people don't know who Janet Mock is, nor how impactful she was for the discourse on trans rights and visibility. Janet Mock is a New York Times bestselling author, trans activist, director, and executive producer for the iconic show Pose. Janet Mock was working for People's Magazine when she shared her viral story after learning about trans children's suicides. In 2014, she signed a book deal for her autobiography, Redefining Realness, My Path to Womanhood, which launched her in the spotlight.
Last week, I met a young woman just like me. She was 23. She held jobs at Macy's and Forever 21. She didn't get the chance to go to college like we did. She didn't have her family support like I did. She grew up a ward of the state and found solace in Chicago's queer and bald communities. I met her last week only because I came across her name and her beautiful brown face on a website with a headline that read, Paige Clay, 23-year-old transgender woman found shot in the head. I was desensitized because I had read Paige's story over and over again. I read it in Lachey McLean's story, and Agnes Torres-Solka's story, and Shelley Hillard's story, and Deani Jones's stories. These women's murders have become the harsh reality that girls like us face. For a trans woman of color, these women's murders are a constant reminder that who we are falls so outside of the box of what society says is acceptable that our deaths and even our lives don't matter.
In the early days of her career, she was one of the very few that tackled trans issues in interviews, on TV and radio. In some instances, she had to endure cringy to complete disrespectful questions, forcing her to take the high road due to her knowing the importance of educating people on these platforms.
So it's hard for people to
like the word tranny. Why is tranny a bad word to say for a transgender? Why is that made you want to become a transgender opposed to being like a gay male?
As a member of the Black community, I am not shocked at the question she was asked on The Breakfast Club. I'm glad she was able to push through, but I can't help but to feel sympathetic for her to have to be in that position. Another major interview being one of the most transphobic she had to endure was Piers Morgan. With the reach of his platform, good could have been done, but he felt the need to sensationalize the discourse with transphobic framings. Another conversation starter for discussing violence against Black trans women is the summer of 2020. Only a week after George Floyd's murder during the climax of the Black Lives Matter protest movement, 21-year-old Iyanna Dior was jumped by nearly 30 people. Over 20 cis Black men jumped in the dog pile after she was getting jumped by cis women over a car accident. The women were demanding Iyanna Dior to pay them before the 5 women decided to jump her. Iyanna Dior being trans is what ultimately made them comfortable to demand money, then follow it with a beating by a mob. This beating just came shortly after the fatal shooting of Tony McDade, a Black trans man shot and killed by Florida police. Black trans women feel like we're the only ones speaking on the violence against us while we stand up for everyone else. We didn't feel reciprocated while the viral Black Lives Matter movement always centered Black cis men. For Iyanna Dior to be beaten by a mob only a week after George Floyd's murder and there to be no mass protests best illustrates the disparity in support. I learned about Iyanna Dior's story through my trans mother, T.S. Madison. She brought together a Black queer folk panel that discussed the viral video a day after its release. They talked about the disgust they felt watching the full 21-minute video. They also dove into trans misogynoir in the Black community and feeling left out in the Black Lives Matter movement, along with Black politicians. Here in this 30-second clip, they talk about one of the biggest transphobic rhetoric that every Black trans woman has heard in the Black community.
That y'all just watched, from my understanding, that started over a fender bender. Mind you, this happened in Minnesota. Same city with George Floyd. And don't try to pull that woman card shit on me. I don't give a fuck about your pussy, bitch, when your hands is balled up at me. That don't mean a fucking thing to me.
And like Maddie said, stop using your pussy as a shield. It don't save you. She hit somebody and somebody hit her back. It don't feel good to get hit. It does not feel good to have violence inflicted upon your body by anybody. I'll be damned if I'm going to let somebody do bodily harm to me because of what they have between their legs. It's not going to work.
This trans athlete adjacent rhetoric are the many reasons trans women are still fighting for the right to be seen as women. Bringing up our strength as males, overpowering them as cis women. The sad reality is there is a large TERF population in the Black community, always downplaying our womanhood and separating us due to our genitalia, reducing womanhood to giving birth and their chromosomes, which is inherently exclusionary to many cis women. These TERF narratives are used to justify the violence against us, just like in Yana Dior's case. Cis Black men reinforcing the TERF rhetoric when they joined in on the beating for her defending herself against cis women, expecting us to be beat and bashed on by them since we're quote-unquote not real women, transphobically reducing us to men in dresses. Another harmful narrative that's getting us killed is the questioning if we deserved it.
A girl or man of the trans experience to be murdered or bullied or jumped on in any type of way, that right, I'm not going to question what could have happened there either. I'm looking at the fact. The fact is they're gone, or the fact is they're bruised and they're wounded and they've been beaten.
The blatant victim blaming, creating narratives of possibly doing something to be beaten and murdered. Clear cases of hate crimes against Black trans women dealt with this dehumanizing suppression. It's parallel to what white people think when a cis Black person is being unjustly killed by police. We rightfully don't ask what cis Black men did, exactly how you shouldn't ask if Trayvon Martin paid for his Skittles. Upholding these false narratives will only continue to kill Black trans folks. In this last part of the panel, they lay out their fears they face as Black queer people in politics, feeling politically ignored from the cis Black political sphere.
Let's say we get all of our African American brothers and sisters in the office or in high positions or in positions and stuff. I'm scared when you get there because I know a lot of y'all have that internalized homophobia, transphobia, and you gonna do what you need to do to fuck me up. So I'm gonna fight for you to get there. Is you gonna kill me? Is you gonna make laws? Are you gonna put stuff in place to destroy me? Like, I'm scared of that. Then I'm scared if my gay white brothers and sisters get in power, because you know they don't fuck with us. Some of them don't fuck with us like that.
We all come together and unite as one to create this change. And then when the Black people are able to, quote unquote, move on up and get another piece of the pie, I want to make sure that pie is divided equally. Because I too got a lot of people like, oh, now is not the time. Don't divide us. It's so sad to say, but there has been a division line that has been drawn a very, 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 very long time ago. A very long time ago.
We don't feel politically relevant to the average Black Democrat, fearing the possibility of them reinforcing cisgender norms that comes with so much baggage. That baggage being upholding toxic masculinity that puts Black queer people's lives at risk. Seeing them dodge a political fight to combat the hate crimes against Black trans and queer people. They'll have general queer conversations, but none discussing the effort to tackle the 80% Black trans murder rate. Our best interest isn't considered despite our outcries on our yearly increases in murders. You'd think the queer community would be more inclusive with the updated Progress Pride flag, yet many can't name a Black trans person that isn't an entertainer. They know about our murder rates, but yet Black queer people are still the majority of people advocating for us. We can barely get most white queer people on board with us with their all lives matter approach to trans issues. They're not reaching across the aisle when they get the platform and backing, noticing certain large white trans folks who don't speak with Black trans folks, let alone advocate for us. It's also showcased in everyday life, seeing a lot of white queer folks struggle to get BIPOC friends. The disparity is especially shown in the massive different treatment to GoFundMes. White queer people either reach or get close to their goal, while Black trans folks massively underfunded, lacking support for even basic survival funds. Something as simple as sharing and boosting can't even be done. Black trans people are still struggling to reach a platform while many white queer people are flourishing post-George Floyd. We feel left behind, especially while they still struggle to even discuss anything about trans misogynoir. I can only assume by now some white queer people have clicked off due to their own white fragility. So, to help remedy that, I'll share ways you can improve your intersectionality. First and foremost, please get to know a Black trans person past entertainment. You can use this video to spark genuine interest in understanding our plight. Diversitize your queer content, making sure you aren't just intaking more queer folks. Black leftists, video essayists, and content creators need the same amount of support. Figure out how best you can help, whether that's just you boosting Black trans folks on social media, also supporting our creative endeavors, and especially spreading the word on our GoFundMes. Watch Cat Black or Professor Flowers' videos. Make sure your leftism is intersectional by not using terms like idpol or tenderqueer. Tenderqueer being a repackaging of idpol. That all said, I wish trans people endurance in this new year and allies stamina, bracing ourselves for another year of transphobia and transmisogynoir.